In this update, we've got a building El Nino that now appears to be a strong El Nino by the end of the year, and that will set the tone on these weather setups going forward for the rest of the year. So let's start off with the global sea surface anomalies right now. And you can see there's definitely a lot of red on the map, especially up here into the North Pacific area and down here into portions of the equatorial region. There's also a warm blob that's draped across the African coast, and that is the building El Nino down there into the equatorial Pacific. And you can see with hurricane season just starting about 10 days from now, back here into the Gulf of Mexico, well above average, Caribbean, well above average, and especially down here in the main development region, also well above average. That's kind of rare for this early on in the season. And then especially these well above average temperature anomalies off here off the coastline, +3. So that's definitely rare to see. So we are almost in uncharted territory. In fact, in some cases we are. If we take a look at of the overall global sea surface anomalies just in the past, since 1981, the last several strong El Ninos, and we're basically on record pace as we stand right now for springtime. This is the highest the global sea surface anomalies has ever been for this time of year, even beating out the last stronger El Nino back in 15 and 16, and we're above that. So there's definitely, concern going forward with this El Nino being a major player in these weather setups with all this increased water vapor that's going to be in the atmosphere, and then heat fuels storms. So we typically look to be more precipitation in a lot of the areas, and that will fuel storm development as well. If we take a look at the chart, this is again back since 1982 all the way to 2023, and this is where we currently are right now, just about right where 2015, 2016 strong El Nino was. But back then the El Nino was already in place. This one is just now beginning going into weak El Nino type criteria, and we're just now building, and we're already at pretty much the same sea surface and temperature anomalies that you were back then, back in 2016, when we'd already been in a full-blown El Nino for basically almost a year by then. So there's definitely areas where we are getting well above average sea surface temperature anomalies. And here's the last several strong El Ninos, right? So we had a stronger El Nino back in 57, 58, and you can see where we topped out right around 1.5, almost to 2. And then we also had another one back in 65, 66. This was the last time. 72, 73 was also a stronger El Nino, topped out at +2 sea surface anomalies. And back then, that was the first time we had a triple dip back to back, La Nina. And coming out of that, we saw a strong El Nino. And then we also had another stronger El Nino back in 82, 83. And then one of the strongest ones on record was 97, 98. And here was the last strong El Nino back into 15 and 16 timeframe. So we're basically on the trend as of right now. If everything keeps going like it does, it looks to be one of the strongest El Ninos on record by the time we get towards the end of the year. And this is the latest update from the Climate Prediction Center and the last ENSO outlook. And look at that, folks. They are already expecting a strong El Nino by the time we get into the heart of hurricane season. So that's a major lift where we are now, but the trend has been very bullish as of late, and that continues to be the trend. And that's going to play a major factor, I would think, into hurricane season, with a lot of more shear going into that environment. And you typically might have a little bit less type of hurricanes, but that's just the actual development. It doesn't imply that you can't get stronger tropical storms, stronger hurricanes within this atmosphere. There's definitely going to be increased moisture added to it. So that's the trend going forward. It looks to be going into a strong, if not one of these super El Ninos, that's right on the cusp of 97, 98, 2015, and maybe actually even be in uncharted territory by the time we get into the fall into the winter months. And, on the short term, this is the transition. We're starting to see a huge transition, especially after we're coming out of a more of a 3-year La Nina. Back then, we had these well below average sea surface anomalies, and this active subtropical jet stream now was basically almost non-existent. Now we see series of low pressure centers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them draped across the southern branch, and that will pull in that added, picking up some of those higher above average sea surface anomalies down here into the equatorial Pacific. And then you have that warm block up here in the North Pacific that builds the ridge over Alaska, builds the ridge over the Pacific Northwest, and then it dives the trough down in the middle of the country. And you typically have storm development that blow up on the east of the Rockies. And then that, by the time those get traveling down on the northwest flow, that takes advantage of the more active subtropical jet, and that fuels storm development in the middle of the country. So that's the setup going forward. You can actually see it on the water vapor imagery with the ridge of high pressure lifting up here into Alaska, drops down over portions of the Pacific Northwest, and then you have the added water vapor complements of that southwesterly flow coming off the more active subtropical jet stream, and then that will overturn the atmosphere typically east of the Rocky Mountains and blowing up across West Texas, Western Oklahoma, Western Kansas, Western Nebraska with that added water vapor. And then as the ridge will build over the Pacific Northwest, in the short term, it's slowly going to migrate from west to east and build over the top. And that is going to be lowering the pressures underneath. And we've been kind of talking about this setup for the last couple of days on this channel. And it still appears even more bullish down here into the southeast, that we may try to get slow development of some sort of tropical type disturbance down there in the southeast. In fact, the latest update from the National Hurricane Center, and this was the first time they've actually have this season. This is the 21st of May, and then we have an area of they highlighted about a 10% probability west of Puerto Rico. We have an area of lowering pressures, and this will migrate. There's also another area I think that's going to form off the southeast coast, and that's complements of that stalled frontal boundary that's over that location right now that will try to fester up more precipitation chances, and that will put a very heavy rain into these regions down here in Florida and off the southeast coast, especially back into Georgia, into the Carolinas. And that's exactly what we see for the next couple of days. So initially for the next couple of days, we've got these storm developments that blow up east of the Rocky Mountains. You have a more active, subtropical jet, blows up across West Texas, Western Oklahoma, and then they travel down on the northwest flow, and they try to produce outflow boundaries out ahead of them to keep them alive. And that's exactly what we'll see going in the next couple of days. At the same time, we've got that low pressure at the center, that stalled frontal boundary. That's going to add very heavy rain down here in Florida, off the southeast coast, back into Georgia, through the Carolinas, while at the same time, we have a less active polar jet with the ridge building over the top, and where you've got that ridge is just dominating sinking air, and it's impossible to rain in that type of atmosphere. In fact, the longer this sits over this area, it's just going to dry the soil, and these areas will be heating up in a big way over the next couple of weeks, actually going forward. You can see the sea surf, the temperature anomalies for the next 5 to 7 days, and you can see that ridge slowly starting to build across west to east at the same time, where the below average temperatures are right around the more unsettled weather. And then you obviously had more cloud cover, you got more rain. That puts more opportunities to be below average down here in this southern branch. And again, when you have more opportunities for additional cloud cover, additional rain opportunities back here to the southern plains, also puts them below average, while we have the ridge building over the top. And I think this will really start to amplify and expand over the Great Lakes, over a good part of the Ohio Valley, as we head towards the end of the month. So if you break the things down for you for the next just almost like 10 days on the precipitation front, you basically get the same flow, right? You get storm systems that basically form east of the Rocky Mountains here, and then you have the added water vapor that's across the middle of the country with that southwesterly flow, and then you'll have the northwest flow as storm developments to keep them a little bit further off, and adding rain totals as they push eastward, and then they'll essentially try to die out. So it puts the areas across the middle of the country above average precipitation anomalies at the same time where the ridge is over the Great Lakes, over the Ohio Valley. That's the area where they basically have a lot of sinking air. You're not going to get any rain chances at all. And then underneath that low pressure center, the combination of the stalled frontal boundary and the added low pressure center, the longer this thing sits, will lower the pressures underneath, especially with the ridge over the top. That puts all the precipitation down in the same areas, keep reforming. And then it also has the above average precipitation locked over in good part of New England as it's more unsettled as you're away from that ridge. So if we find ourselves with the first excessive heat area that we have to be concerned about with the building ridge that we're really start to build, especially over the 27th through the 29th time frame in places like into Missouri, into Iowa, especially into Illinois, back into Indiana, more into the upper Midwest regions, you got to be concerned about the heat really starting to build as the ground really starts to dry out, and the drier soils will heat up that atmosphere in a big way. So if we extend it going into that June timeframe, again, we find ourselves with the ridge building over the top, over the Pacific Northwest, and that will be traveling down the northwest flow. We go into June, so June's, transitioning, coming out of spring, heading towards, into your summer months, while at the same time, the active subtropical jet, the low pressures, the series of troughs, and the more monsoonal type flow starts to kick in down here into the desert Southwest. That puts you under the below average temperature anomalies with the ridge building over the top of you. And if we look at the precipitation, kind of implies the same thing. Again, storm systems blow up over the Rockies and they travel down the northwest flows. So there's areas that look to be above average precipitation, and then there's areas across the middle of the country is about a 50-50 shot of being below or above average. And these areas still get a lot of rain in the month of June. So this doesn't imply that you won't get any rain at all. It implies that you'll have probability chances to be more or less average precipitation, which you typically get for June, where you're drier under that ridge of high pressure, more sinking air. Then you have a greater probability of seeing below average precipitation up here into the upper Midwest across portions of the Ohio Valley region. And then underneath, where you're in Florida, where you're typically in the rainier season, you get those above average rainfall. And so it's not really until maybe the middle of June that we start to see possibly the ridge maybe breaking down by then and starting to back off and really be highlighted, allowing maybe a trough that comes in underneath. And finally, maybe by then, still probably a couple weeks off, bringing a more unsettled weather for these areas across the Great Lakes and to the Ohio Valley regions. And then if we extend the view and take a look for the entire month of June, we see a little bit more bullish type setup as far as the precipitation front, especially again, these main setups that blow up east of the Rocky Mountains, highlighting the middle of the country, areas that are actually in a desperate drought, will slowly be eating away of these drought prone areas. We do have the trough coming in on the second half of the June, putting some rain opportunities back into portions where they desperately will need the rain by then, into portions of the Ohio Valley, and still fairly wet across portions of New England. So, but if we transition and go into basically July, August, and September, kind of look at more of a broader view for the summer months, and the heart of the summer months, again, we find our more active subtropical jet stream further south. And then we've got that ridge really kind of highlighting over the Ohio Valley region, maybe across portions of the southeast, with these below average precipitation anomalies moving in. by then, as the El Nino still continues to building as we get deeper and deeper into the end of the year time frame. But it's really not until the fall. I think by the time we get into the fall months, it'll be really locked in. It'll be full-blown El Nino by then, if not that strong El Nino by then. And then it will take more of that active subtropical jet and really increase the precipitation anomalies across more of the southern jet stream here, back into the California regions, back into the desert Southwest, through the southern plains, through the Southeast, and up the coast through the mid-Atlantic and up into the Northeast, and further north where we have that ridge, where we have a less active polar jet. You tend to be drier than average with these less opportunities with that ridge building over the top, and there's nothing to feed off of. All the precipitations basically further south. And I think that gets even more prone and more evident as we transition going into that December, January, and February. This pretty long ways out, but again, it shows you the building El Nino, and it'll be strong by then, and it has that more, subtropical jet really active. So you'll have opportunities, obviously, with cold shots coming down, more opportunities with more added rain values back then, especially across the southern branch, as the El Nino really starts to intensify over a good part of the country and becomes more bullish as we look at more of the seasonal anomalies back into January, February, and March timeframe, with a lot of green on the map with El Nino in full force by then. So once this starts, and El Nino's not that far away, it'll be more of the moderate, if not strong criteria, especially as we go into fall. And then it could be even record territory by the time we head towards, deeper into fall, into the winter months, putting a good part of the U.S. above average precipitation anomalies, heading into, winter, going into that winter 2023, winter 24 time frame. So I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I update on those platforms as well. Definitely hit the subscribe button on my channel. I've got 175,000 followers. I'd like to bump that up to 200,000 by the time we get into August 1st timeframe. So definitely help me get there by slapping the subscribe button if you haven't already. And catch the next update while I protect you before and after the storm.